The first warning came with the wind, a strange cold wave rolling across the metal walkway of Verisniva's border station, making every panel hum like a distant heartbeat. And in that moment, Sergeant Elias Ward felt something shift in the air, something that did not belong, something that whispered danger even before anyone could see it. The ceasefire between humans and the Nalori Empire had held for 7 difficult years. Yet on this lonely checkpoint far from the eyes of diplomats, peace always felt fragile, like thin glass pressed under a growing storm. And Ward knew that one wrong move, one wrong shipment, one wrong arrival could break the balance completely. The trade convoy appeared on the horizon like a glimmering silver serpent, sliding across the desert plain with a smoothness that spoke of immense wealth and hidden pride. And the moment Ward's visor zoomed in, his jaw tightened, because at the center of the formation stood a tall crystalline transport, marked with a royal crest, a symbol of authority he had hoped he would not face today. Princess Saylara of the Nalori, young heir to an empire known for its elegance and arrogance, stepped out surrounded by armored guards whose armor pulsed with faint violet light. She held her chin high, eyes cold and unbothered, as if the desert heat and the human soldiers around her did not exist at all. Ward approached with steady steps and a calm voice, reminding her of checkpoint protocol, reminding her of the interspecies treaty that required every convoy to submit to inspection. But Saylara dismissed his words as if swatting away dust, telling her guards to move forward without stopping, telling them that no human had the right to delay a royal mission. And for a heartbeat, the station fell silent except for the low thrum of engines waiting for a decision. When her guards tried to bypass the scanners, Ward raised his hand, and the entire checkpoint shifted into lockdown mode. Tall barriers rising from the ground with a deep metallic rumble, drones circling with glowing red lenses, and Saylara's calm expression cracked for the first time, turning sharp and offended as she demanded he step aside. Ward did not move, his voice firm yet respectful, reminding her again of the treaty, telling her that rank did not override law, telling her that discipline protected lives on both sides. And somewhere behind him his soldiers watched with nervous breath, knowing one slip could ignite a disaster none of them were ready for. Saylara finally allowed the inspection, though irritation burned in her eyes like sparks hidden beneath ice. But as the scanners swept through the convoy, alarms erupted in harsh red light, and the main display revealed something no one expected, a compact quantum cipher buried within the cargo crates. The kind of device used only for secret fleet communication or covert operations that could shatter a fragile peace in seconds. Saylara stared at it with surprise that looked too real to be acted, insisting she had never authorized such a thing, insisting someone must have tampered with her convoy. But Ward studied her expression closely, noticing a flicker of fear behind her pride, a fear she tried to hide with royal posture and cold authority. He announced the lawful sanction, impounding the convoy, restricting the princess to the station quarters until an investigation confirmed her innocence or guilt. And though she protested, though she tried to wield her title like a weapon, Ward's tone remained steady, unshaken, showing no disrespect but no weakness either, a balance she clearly did not expect from a human soldier. When night fell, the heat of the desert faded into a soft blue cold, and the moonlight painted the metal platforms with long shadows that felt like silent watchers. Ward stood alone reviewing sensor logs, the quantum cipher still locked behind triple security, humming faintly like a trapped heartbeat, and something about its signal made his skin tighten. A strange ghost signature appeared on the scanners, weak, distant but undeniably real. A signal coming from deep orbit, a signal that matched neither human nor Nalori frequencies, something outside both sides' known fleets, something watching them, waiting, maybe even guiding events from afar. And Ward narrowed his eyes, sensing the first edge of a larger danger forming around them. Before he could analyze it, the comm line crackled with static, an operator's voice breaking through with panic, reporting that the Southern Patrol had gone silent, their beacon lost. Their last transmission cut mid-sentence as a distant flash lit up the horizon, a silent explosion blooming like a dying star just beyond the canyon ridge. Ward rushed to the edge of the platform, watching the faint glow fade into darkness, knowing in his bones that this was no accident, no malfunction, but a message, a warning, maybe even the first strike of something far greater than a routine inspection gone wrong, and he felt the weight of responsibility settle deeper on his shoulders. Behind him, Princess Saylara stood in the doorway, her expression no longer arrogant but unreadable, her eyes reflecting the distant glow like shards of broken light, as if she too sensed that forces beyond either species had begun to move, Forces that neither of them yet understood. Forces connected to the cipher she claimed she had never seen. The wind grew colder, carrying the faint smell of burnt metal from the distant blast, and for the first time Sailara's voice softened as she asked Ward what he thought had happened. But all he could offer was the truth, spoken quietly and without fear, that something had just changed on Varys 9, something that threatened both human and Nalori lives, and that whatever it was, it had begun with her convoy. The checkpoint lights flickered, the scanners pulsed, and the night whispered with tension as if the world itself waited to see what would happen next, as if destiny had taken a breath and held it, suspended in the silence between two enemies who suddenly needed each other to survive what was coming. And far above them, hidden in the dark reaches of orbit, a second ghost signal blinked alive, watching, counting, waiting for the next move to fall into place, as if the universe itself was preparing to test how much discipline, courage, and sacrifice one human soldier and one alien princess were truly capable of. The alarms from the distant blast still echoed in everyone's bones, a haunting vibration that clung to the cold night air around Varys 9, and as the darkness settled deeper over the checkpoint, it felt as if the whole world had paused to listen, waiting for the next blow to fall. Ward walked through the dim corridors with a heavy calm in his steps, every sensor panel flickering as if touched by unseen hands, every shadow stretching longer than it should. And even though he tried to keep his breath steady, he could feel the pressure of danger tightening around him like a slow-closing fist. Princess Salara followed behind him, her royal posture now mixed with something quieter, something uncertain, and though she tried to hide it, Ward could feel her unease drifting through the air like faint perfume, a fragile contrast to the arrogance she carried when she first arrived. He led her into the small debriefing chamber, its metallic walls reflecting the dim gold glow of emergency lights, and as the door slid shut behind them, the silence became heavy enough to taste, a silence filled with questions neither of them wanted to face. Ward placed the quantum cipher on the table between them, its surface pulsing with faint blue heartbeat-like flashes, and Saelara stared at it with an expression that mixed fear and anger, as if she wanted to deny its existence but knew she no longer could. She insisted again that she had no knowledge of the device, her voice steadier this time, less defensive, but Ward could see the tremor beneath it, a tremor that betrayed the truth that she was hiding something, even if she was trying not to. He leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm, reminding her that people had just died on the Southern Trail, reminding her that the blast was no coincidence, reminding her that whoever planted the cipher was moving fast and ruthlessly, and that they had no time for pride or royal ego. Only truth. Saelara looked away for a long moment, her eyes reflecting the pulsing blue light like broken shards of glass, and finally she whispered that the cipher's frequency belonged to a faction she feared, a faction that lurked in the shadows of her empire, a faction hungry for war, a faction she hoped would never reach this far. But when Ward pressed her for a name, she shut down again, fear closing her throat, her hands curling into fists at her sides, and he realized this wasn't the arrogance of a spoiled heir anymore. It was the fear of someone trapped by forces far larger than herself. Ward stood, walked to the observation window, and looked out at the desert where faint smoke still curled into the sky, its slow spiral rising like a ghost stretching toward the stars, and he felt the weight of responsibility settle deeper on his shoulders, heavier than his armor, heavier than the silence between him and the princess. He told her that he had to enforce the sanction, that she would remain confined to the station until they understood what had happened. And though she tensed at the word confined, she didn't argue. She simply lowered her gaze, as if accepting that her title meant little in the face of the danger now rising around them. Hours passed in that tense calm, and Ward returned to the command deck where his officers worked in low whispers, scanning for the vanished patrol, searching for signs of enemy activity, but the desert gave nothing except static and empty echoes, as if the night itself had swallowed the soldiers whole. Then a sharp beep pierced the silence and the console revealed fragments of data from the destroyed patrol, charred pieces of recording chips recovered by drones, glitchy but still carrying a sliver of the truth. Ward and two technicians reconstructed the footage, piecing together blurred frames of a sudden bright flash, a collapsing ridge, and a streak of violet energy cutting through the sand like a blade thrown by an invisible hand. Saelara entered quietly, drawn by the tension in the room, and when she saw the footage freeze on a frame of that violet streak, her face paled, her breath slowing, her eyes widening with the terror of recognition. She whispered a name under her breath, a name Ward barely heard, The name of a warlord she once feared more than any enemy human fleets had ever fielded. A warlord who believed the ceasefire was a betrayal of Nalori destiny. A warlord rumored to command weapons built in forgotten corners of the Empire. Ward asked her to speak clearly, but she shook her head, panic rising, because naming him meant acknowledging that her convoy, her presence, her mission had been manipulated by someone powerful enough to use her as a pawn, and the weight of that truth pressed against her chest like a crushing hand. Before she could answer, her tablet vibrated softly with a coded alert. A private Nalori frequency only high members of the royal court were allowed to receive. And fear flickered through her eyes as she opened it, expecting a message from home, expecting guidance or warning. But instead she saw a single sentence, written in a harsh, jagged script she knew too well. Deliver the human enforcer to Grid 17, or Varys Nye burns. Her hands trembled. Her breath broke and Ward stepped closer, reading the message over her shoulder, understanding instantly that someone was forcing her into a corner, trying to split them apart, trying to turn fear into chaos, trying to ignite war through manipulation crafted with cruel precision. Solara tried to deny it, but her voice cracked, revealing the deep conflict inside her, the crushing pressure between loyalty to her people and the fear of becoming a weapon in another's hands. And Ward's eyes softened as he saw beyond her royal armor into the terrified young woman beneath it. He told her she had a choice now, a choice that would shape not only her life but the fate of thousands, whether human or Nalori, and though his tone stayed calm, there was a gravity in his words that reached straight into her heart. For the first time she looked at him not as a guard, not as an annoyance, but as someone trying to protect lives with a discipline she had never understood before. A discipline that felt strangely steady and strangely reassuring in the middle of the chaos rising around them. Outside, the wind carried another distant rumble across the night, a low thunder that felt like the world sharpening its teeth, preparing for the next strike. And Ward knew the fragile peace between their species hung by a single thread, a thread now held in the shaking hands of an alien princess who had just been given an impossible threat, and a human soldier who refused to bend under fear. And somewhere in the dark sky above them, the ghost signal blinked again, faint but growing stronger, as if counting down to a moment neither of them were prepared to face. The morning light over Varys Nye rose slow and heavy, spreading across the desert like a tired breath, and even though the sun warmed the metal walkways, the air inside the station felt colder than the night before. Colder because everyone sensed the danger growing around them. Even before a single alarm sounded, Ward walked beside Princess Solara through the quiet command hall, their steps echoing softly, their shadows stretching along the floor like two lines that kept crossing, even though their worlds were supposed to stay separate. And every time Ward looked at her, he could see the worry behind her steady face, a silent fear she tried to bury beneath royal posture but could not fully hide. He led her to the secure analysis chamber, a small room filled with soft blue lights and humming consoles that monitored everything from starship signals to ground vibrations. And as the doors sealed behind them, the room felt isolated from the rest of the world, like a place where truths could not hide. Ward placed her tablet on the table, the cruel message still glowing on the screen, and Solara stared at it with a mixture of shame and anger. Because she knew the warlord who sent it wanted to break her spirit, wanted to force her into a role she never chose, wanted to use her title as a weapon to ignite a war she did not believe in. He asked her again about the name she whispered the night before, but she hesitated. The words caught between loyalty and fear, between truth and the danger it carried, and Ward waited patiently, saying nothing, giving her space to breathe in a world closing tighter around her. Finally she spoke, her voice low like a confession being dragged from deep inside her chest, telling him the name of the warlord who haunted her life. Vath Koru, a man who believed power came only through destruction, a man who gathered weapons built in abandoned labs, a man who wanted the ceasefire shattered, so the Nalori Empire could return to its old glory through blood and fire. Ward listened without judgment, only quiet focus, and then he stepped closer, reminding her that the message was a trap designed to push her into betraying the humans, to isolate Ward, to break the fragile trust forming between them. And Solara's breathing grew unsteady as she admitted she had considered running, considered turning herself in just to spare the station, considered surrendering to Koru even though she knew he had no intention of sparing anyone. Ward shook his head gently, telling her that discipline meant standing firm even when fear tried to twist the mind, telling her that law meant nothing if they surrendered to threats, telling her that she was not alone in this fight. And Sayalara's eyes softened in a way he hadn't seen before, as if something inside her finally understood why humans clung so tightly to their rules. Before Sayalara could reply, the console on the wall beeped sharply, revealing the reconstructed fragments of the quantum cipher's signal, and Ward leaned forward as the hollow display pulsed with threads of light, weaving into a strange geometric shape that mirrored the distant blast pattern from the night before. Miri, the young human technician, rushed in with a tablet and a breathless urgency, explaining that she had traced the cipher's resonance to a series of hidden beacons across the desert, beacons that aligned into a long chain pointing toward the storm canyons on the far horizon, a place known for deadly lightning walls and swirling ion currents that could swallow ships whole. Saylara looked at the map, her face tightening as recognition flickered in her eyes, and she finally admitted the truth she had avoided, telling them the storm canyons once housed an ancient Nalori research vault, a place buried and abandoned after a forbidden project failed decades ago, a place Vaithkoru could easily turn into a weapon strong enough to erase a city, maybe even a small fleet. Ward felt a chill spread through him, not because he doubted her, but because everything she said fit the pattern too perfectly, like pieces of a puzzle someone else had arranged long before any of them arrived. And he asked her if the cipher was a key, a locator, or a countdown. Saylara whispered that she feared it might be all three, and that the blast that killed the patrol was a test, a way for the warlord to check alignment before activating whatever monster machine lay hidden in the canyons. And her voice cracked as she said she never wanted to be part of this, never wanted her name tied to destruction, never wanted her position used by someone who saw her as nothing but a tool. Ward stepped closer, his voice steady, telling her that running would not save her people, that hiding would not save the station, that surrendering would only feed the warlord's hunger. And she looked up at him with trembling eyes, asking why he trusted her at all, why he believed she wasn't part of the plot, why he thought she deserved another chance after arriving with a device that could start a war. He told her he wasn't trusting the princess. He was trusting the person he had seen over the last 12 hours, the person who looked terrified at the blast footage, the person who showed guilt instead of arrogance when the truth cornered her, the person who stood beside him instead of exploiting his fear. And Sayalara's breath hitched as if his words struck a part of her heart she thought was long dead. The moment hung between them, a fragile thread of humanity stretching across two worlds that had never understood each other. But before either of them could deepen it, the alarm lights turned red, flooding the room with a harsh glow, and the station AI announced an incoming threat, a cluster of unidentified drones approaching from the western ridge, moving with unnatural speed, their energy signatures matching the violet streak that killed the patrol. Ward grabbed his rifle, Sayalara steadied herself, and Miri activated the shield grid, but already the ground began to shake with a distant metallic hum, as if something massive was stirring beneath the sand, as if the storm canyons were waking from a long sleep. And in that moment Ward understood the truth. The warlord was no longer testing his plan. The warlord had already begun. The cipher was not only a clue but a spark, and whatever waited in those canyons was counting down toward activation. The wind howled across the desert like a warning from the world itself, and Ward knew the peace they fought to protect was collapsing fast, their only hope lying in a princess caught between destiny and fear, and a human soldier who refused to let darkness decide their fate. The storm canyons waited, on the horizon like a sleeping beast, their jagged cliffs glowing faint blue under the morning sun. And as Ward's team moved toward them in the armored rover, every bump in the ground felt like a warning. Every gust of wind felt like the world whispering that something ancient and dangerous was waking beneath the rocks. Inside the rover, Princess Sayalara sat across from Ward, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes following the shifting sands outside as if searching for ghosts she hoped would stay buried. And Ward watched her for a moment, noticing how the pride she carried earlier had been replaced by a quiet resolve. A strength born not from power but from fear turned into purpose. The rover shook as it passed through an ion pocket, the air crackling with tiny sparks that danced across the windows like stars trapped in glass. And Miri, seated at the controls, muttered that the readings were unstable. The closer they got to the canyons, the more the sensors malfunctioned, as if the very air was being bent by some unseen machine. Theron, the Nalori guard captain who had joined them reluctantly after realizing the threat, stood near the back door with his spear-like weapon humming faintly, his eyes sharp and unblinking as he watched the dunes behind them for any sign of pursuit. Because they all knew Vaithkoru's forces wouldn't let them reach the canyons without resistance, The rover slowed as the ground shifted into cracked stone, the canyon walls rising like towers carved by storms older than any of them, and the moment they stepped out, the air felt different, heavier, filled with a vibrating hum that pressed against their skin like a heartbeat, pulsing through the earth. Saylara took a deep breath and whispered that she had been here once as a child, brought by her mother to see the old research outpost before it was sealed, and she remembered the scientists speaking in hushed tones about experiments that blurred the line between technology and life, creating machines that responded to thought, fear, even intent. Machines so dangerous the Empire was forced to abandon them. Ward felt the weight of her words sink into him like ice, and he scanned the canyon with narrowed eyes, seeing faint lines on the stone walls that glowed with soft violet light each time lightning cracked across the sky far above. Lines that resembled veins running through a living body. They moved deeper, their footsteps echoing softly against the stone, and each echo felt like a reply from something hidden further inside, something listening, something waiting, and even the wind seemed to shift around them, swirling through narrow passages as if guiding them, or warning them away. After an hour of climbing and weaving through sharp ridges, they reached a cliff overlooking a vast hollow chamber carved into the canyon floor, and Sayalara's breath caught in her throat, because at the center stood a towering structure shaped like a twisted spire of metal and stone, humming with a soft rhythmic pulse that matched the beat of her own heart. The machine rose at least 6 stories high, its surface alive with shifting patterns that glowed in waves, and Ward felt an instinctive fear crawl through him, the kind of fear a human felt when standing before something not meant for mortal understanding, something built with alien brilliance but carrying an unmistakable scent of death. Miri knelt to examine the data plates scattered around the edges of the chamber, their symbols burnt but still faintly readable, and she whispered that the resonance lines connected to the quantum cipher completely. The frequency match flawless, meaning this device wasn't just old. It had been waiting for the cipher to awaken it, waiting for a key to complete a cycle left unfinished for decades. Saylara stepped forward, her hand hovering near the glowing surface, and as she drew closer, the pulsing patterns began to change, shifting into new shapes that mirrored Nalori royal sigils, ancient symbols once used to designate authority and access, symbols tied to bloodlines, symbols tied to her. Theron gasped, his voice low as he realized the truth. The machine recognized the presence of royal blood, meaning only someone like Saylara could activate or deactivate it, meaning Vaith Koru's plan was clear. He needed her. He needed her fear, her panic, or her surrender to force the machine into awakening or destruction. Saylara trembled, her voice barely holding steady as she admitted she didn't know if she could shut it down, because the technology was forbidden long before she was born, and the stories of its power were whispered like myths told to frighten children, myths of storms that swallowed fleets and weapons that turned skies into burning oceans. Ward placed a hand gently on her shoulder, grounding her, reminding her that she wasn't facing this alone, reminding her that fear didn't define destiny, reminding her that discipline wasn't about punishment, but about control. Control over chaos, control over the paths chosen by others, and her breath steadied as she met his eyes, finding strength in his calm resilience. But before she could move closer to the machine, a deep rumble shook the canyon, dust falling from the cliffs like rain, and Miri shouted as readings spiked violently, showing that someone else had activated a secondary uplink. Someone nearby was trying to force the machine awake even without the cipher. The sky above darkened as shadowy shapes swooped across the canyon rim, stealth drones armed with violet energy cores circling like predatory birds preparing for a strike. And Ward instantly raised his rifle, shouting for cover as the first blast hit the rocks behind them, sending shards flying like burning knives. Saylara ducked behind a stone pillar, her heartbeat pounding loud enough to echo in her ears, and she realized that Vaith Koru wasn't simply watching. He was already here, already pushing the machine toward activation, already tightening the noose around them. Ward shouted orders, Miri activated a portable shield. Theron engaged the drones with lightning-fast spear strikes, and the canyon erupted into chaos, every blast lighting the ancient machine in flashes of purple fire, every tremor making its core pulse harder, faster, louder. And Saylara understood in that terrifying moment that if she did nothing, the machine would wake completely, and Varys 9 would become the first world burned in a war neither humans nor Nalori could survive. With fear clawing at her chest and courage rising beneath it, she stepped out from cover, determination sharpening her voice as she shouted that she knew what she had to do, and Ward's eyes widened as he realized she was going straight toward the machine's core. straight into the heart of danger, straight into the choice that would shape everything. The canyon thundered, the drones swarmed, the machine pulsed like a living storm ready to break open, and in that moment, the fate of two species hung in the trembling steps of an alien princess walking toward a nightmare built from her ancestors' sins. While a human soldier fought desperately to keep her alive long enough to change destiny, the canyon roared like a wounded giant awakening from centuries of sleep. Every tremor shaking dust from the cliffs as the strange living machine pulsed in the center, its glowing veins brightening with each passing second, and Saylara felt the heat of its power on her skin as she stepped closer, her heart beating so loudly she could barely hear the battle raging behind her. Ward shouted her name, his voice cracking through the storm as he fought off a swarm of drones that dived from above like metal vultures, their violet beams slicing through the air with deadly precision. And even in the chaos, he kept his eyes on her, terrified that she was going to sacrifice herself without warning. Saylara paused only once, just long enough to meet his gaze, and in that moment he saw the truth she had been hiding since the convoy incident. The fear, the guilt, the weight of carrying a royal legacy twisted by war and lies. But beneath all of it, he saw something else. A spark of courage trying to break free. She turned back to the machine, her steps slow and steady, the ground vibrating with each beat of the pulsing core. And as she reached it, the patterns on its surface shifted again, forming spirals that lifted from the metal like holographic waves, spirals that responded to her presence as if recognizing something buried in her blood. Behind her, Theron fought with two broken spears, striking drones out of the air with desperate precision. His armor cracked, his breath harsh, but his loyalty keeping him on his feet even as more enemy signals flickered across the scanner, and Miri knelt beside a portable console, trying to hack the uplink that someone else had activated deeper in the canyon, her fingers trembling as she muttered that the system was fighting her like a living mind. Saylara placed her hand on the machine's surface, and a jolt of cold electricity shot up her arm, making her gasp as the glowing patterns crawled up her wrist like living ink, tracing her veins, reading her pulse, binding her to the machine's old command codes. And she whispered to herself that she wasn't ready. She wasn't strong enough. She wasn't the kind of heir her mother believed she could become. Ward ran to her, blasting a drone out of the air before it could strike her from behind, and he leaned close, telling her she didn't need to be ready or perfect. She only needed to be willing to stand between destruction and innocent lives. And she swallowed hard at his words, feeling something settle inside her, something steady, something brave. She pressed both hands to the machine, and suddenly the canyon fell silent for a heartbeat, the wind freezing mid-gust, the air crackling with tension as the device recognized her completely, the patterns on its surface blooming into a vortex of blue and violet light that filled the entire chamber with a trembling glow. Ward grabbed her shoulders, asking if she knew what she was doing. But she shook her head with a sad smile, saying she only knew she had to try because if she didn't, Vaith Koru would turn this forgotten machine into a weapon that could erase entire human towns. Nalori colonies, everything standing on the fragile line between fear and peace. Before Ward could say anything else, a voice echoed through the canyon. Amplified by speakers hidden in the rock, a cold voice filled with arrogance and triumph, and Saylara's heart sank at the sound of it. Vaith Koru speaking like a shadow wearing her culture's pride like a mask, telling her she had fulfilled her destiny by arriving, telling her she belonged to his vision of power, telling her to step away from the machine or watch her people burned into dust. Saylara's knees trembled, her breath catching painfully in her chest as the old fear returned like a storm. She had lived under Koru's threat for years, the way he whispered poison into the empire, the way he twisted tradition into chains, the way he manipulated the court into believing war was salvation. But this was the first time she stood in open defiance of him, and it felt like stepping into the mouth of a hungry beast. Ward stood in front of her, shielding her from the drones that circled again, his voice steady as he told Koru that fear did not equal destiny, that Saylara wasn't a weapon or a pawn, that she had the right to choose peace even when someone like Koru wanted to drag her into darkness. And even though Koru laughed coldly at those words, something hardened in Saylara's eyes, something he could no longer control. She took a shaking breath and reached for the machine's core interface, a glowing strand of shifting light that pulsed in time with her heartbeat, and she whispered the ancient Nalori override phrase her mother once taught her in a quiet moment of trust. A phrase meant only for leaders who truly sought unity, not destruction, and the machine responded, the light surging brighter as if awakening fully beneath her touch. But before she could complete the sequence, Koru's drones unleashed a new wave of attacks. beams ripping through stone pillars, explosions shaking the canyon so violently that Ward had to pull her back from falling debris. Miri screamed a warning that Koru's uplink was forcing a partial activation, meaning the machine was seconds away from spiraling beyond their control. Theron charged into the chaos, his armor scorched, shouting that he had spotted the hidden uplink tower near the western ridge, but it was protected by a squad of cloaked sentinels who moved like shadows against the rock, and Ward knew immediately that the tower had to fall or the machine would awaken completely and unleash a storm no one could survive. Saylara grabbed Ward's arm, telling him to go, telling him only he could reach the tower with enough speed and precision, telling him she would hold off the machine's activation as long as she could, and Ward looked at her with a mixture of fear and pride, knowing she was putting herself directly between death and hope. He didn't want to leave her, but he saw the fire in her eyes, a fire no warlord could snuff out, a fire that reminded him of every soldier he ever trusted, every leader he ever followed. Every moment he stood against impossible odds simply because someone needed protection. The canyon thundered around them, the sky flashing with lightning that felt unnaturally alive, the machine pulsing like a heart preparing to break free, and Ward ran toward the ridge with determination burning in his chest, knowing that if he failed, Saylara would die, the station would fall, and the fragile peace between their worlds would shatter forever. Behind him, Saylara returned her hands to the glowing core, her voice soft but steady as she whispered another ancient command, her body illuminated by the swirling light, her fate and the fate of two species now tied to a machine built from forgotten nightmares. And above it all, Vaith Koru watched from the shadows of his hidden platform, his eyes cold and triumphant, unaware that the princess he thought he could control was now choosing her own destiny, a destiny carved from courage, fear, and a single truth. She whispered under her breath as the machine answered her touch, "I am not your weapon." The sky above the storm canyons darkened into a deep, restless blue as if the world itself sensed the danger unfolding below, and Ward sprinted across the jagged ridge with his breath burning in his lungs, each step pounding against stone that trembled under the machine's growing pulse, every heartbeat reminding him that Saylara was standing alone inside that glowing chamber, holding back a force older and deadlier than any weapon he had ever faced. The wind tore at his armor as he climbed higher, sparks of ion lightning crackling in the air around him, lighting the cliffs in white flashes that revealed the hidden uplink tower perched at the top of a narrow rock spine, a twisted antenna of black metal humming with the same violet frequency that killed the patrol, its energy swirling upward like a beacon calling disaster from the sky. Ward's grip tightened on his rifle as he approached, and he saw movement between the sharp stones, dark shapes gliding with unnatural silence, Vaith Koru's sentinels, armored shadows whose eyes glowed with cold violet fire, their bodies moving like whispered threats across the canyon rim, and Ward ducked behind a boulder just as the first beam sliced the air where his head had been. Below him, Saylara stood at the heart of the machine, her hands pressed into its living surface, her eyes glowing faintly as the device responded to her voice, her breath shaking but steady, every command she spoke slowing the machine's activation for a few precious seconds. Seconds Ward needed to reach the tower. Seconds she fought for with every trembling muscle in her body. Theron leapt into the air with a wounded roar, striking one of the sentinels before it could flank Ward, his spear shattering on impact but buying a heartbeat of time, and he shouted that the tower's signal was strengthening, that if the uplink reached full synchronization, the machine would awaken completely and release a storm of ion fire strong enough to burn the canyon into glass. Ward nodded once, the silent promise of a soldier who understood what failure meant, and he charged forward into the swarm of silent enemies, kicking one sentinel off the ridge, ducking beneath another's blade, firing bursts of white light that cracked through armor and sent sparks scattering into the whipping wind, each movement fueled by something deeper than duty, fueled by the thought of Saylara standing alone, fighting a nightmare he refused to let consume her. Down in the chamber, Miri struggled to maintain the portable shield as drones circled overhead, firing streaks of energy that hit the barrier with earth-shaking force, and she shouted updates to Saylara even as sweat dripped down her brow, telling her that the machine's core was pushing back, resisting her commands, adapting like a living creature trying to break free of its restraints. Sayara's voice shook as she whispered another override phrase, her mother's ancient lessons rising in her memory like flickers of candlelight in the dark, lessons of unity, of strength not born from power but from compassion and clarity, and she felt the machine respond, slowing in its pulse, dimming for a moment before surging back with even greater force. A reminder that she was fighting something built to reshape storms and erase battlefields. Ward reached the top of the ridge, his chest rising and falling like a drum, and the uplink tower loomed before him, its cables coiled like steel serpents, its core glowing bright enough to sting his eyes. And he raised his rifle to fire, but a sentinel blocked the shot, slamming him against the rock wall with brutal force, its metal fingers closing around his throat like a vice, its glowing eyes drilling into his with cold hatred. Ward grabbed a shard of broken stone and drove it into the sentinel's neck joint, sparks bursting as it staggered, and he rolled away, landing hard on the ground before firing a clean shot into its chest, watching it collapse into the dust with a clang that echoed across the ridge like a final warning. But there was no time to breathe, no time to rest, because the tower's hum grew louder, vibrating through the air like a monstrous heartbeat, and lightning split the sky as energy spiraled upward toward the clouds, forming a storm vortex that began to rotate above the canyon, a vortex strong enough to guide a fleet killer blast. Scylla saw the sky darkening and fear stabbed through her chest, a cold sharpness that sliced through her resolve, and she shouted Ward's name, her voice trembling with desperation, telling him she could not hold the machine much longer, telling him its power was rising beyond her control, telling him that the device was starting to push her out. Recognizing her defiance as a threat, Ward heard her voice even through the roaring storm, her words traveling across the canyon like a lifeline, grounding him, reminding him why he was here. And he drove forward with the last of his strength, grabbing the tower's central cable and ripping it free from its socket, the violet energy bursting in a violent wave that threw him backward, slamming him against the rocks hard enough to steal his breath. The uplink flickered wildly, sparks raining down, and the humming tower began to collapse as the signal died, its black metal twisting on itself like a dying creature trying to breathe. And the storm vortex above flickered, cracking into fading arcs of lightning before dissolving into scattered sparks across the sky. But even with the uplink destroyed, the ancient machine below did not calm, its core reacting in fury, pulsing faster, brighter, its veins tightening around Scylla's hands as if trying to absorb her against her will, and she cried out, the sound filled with agony and defiance as the machine pulled at her energy like a starving beast. Ward forced himself to his feet, pain stabbing through his ribs, and he looked down at the chamber, his heart freezing as he saw Scylla being dragged closer to the glowing heart of the machine, her body shaking violently, her voice breaking as she continued to fight, refusing to surrender, refusing to let Koru win, refusing to let the world burn. Theron and Miri shouted her name, but the machine drowned them out with a roar that felt like thunder cracking inside the earth itself, and Ward felt terror rise in his throat as he realized the truth. Destroying the uplink wasn't enough. The machine had awakened too far, and the only thing keeping it from erupting was Scylla's fading strength. And far above the canyon, Vaith Koru's raider cruiser broke through the clouds, its engines howling like a beast descending for the kill, its cannons glowing as it prepared to burn everything below, its silhouette casting a shadow across Scylla's trembling form and Ward's desperate gaze. The war was no longer a threat waiting in the future. It had arrived, roaring into the sky above them, and the only thing standing between annihilation and survival was a human soldier clinging to hope, and an alien princess refusing to break beneath the weight of destiny. The sky above the storm canyon screamed with violet fire, the last remnants of the raider cruiser's energy flares cutting through the clouds like burning knives, and Ward's boots pounded the jagged ridge as he raced toward the canyon chamber, every step trembling with exhaustion, fear, and the desperate hope that Scylla was still alive inside the chamber. Scylla's hands clung to the glowing core of the ancient machine, her body trembling violently as pulses of energy shot through the air, the hum vibrating through her bones like a living heartbeat, and she whispered broken words of defiance, words meant for herself as much as for Vaith Koru, words that tried to anchor her in the thin line between survival and surrender. Ward burst into the chamber, dust and sparks trailing behind him, and his eyes locked on her trembling figure, the glow of the machine reflecting in her wide, determined eyes, and even in the chaos he saw courage, a courage that refused to bend beneath centuries of power and fear, a courage that reminded him why he fought, why he stood, why he could never give up. Theron and Miri followed close behind, weaving between falling shards of metal and flickering light, their hands clutching weapons and tools alike, their faces pale with exhaustion but burning with resolve, and Ward shouted for them to protect the exits while he moved closer, guiding Scylla's shoulders with firm, steady hands, whispering that she was not alone, that they would face this together. The machine pulsed faster, its veins of violet and blue tightening around Sayalara's hands, trying to pull her in as if it recognized her life force as its only weakness, and she gritted her teeth, forcing herself to push back, murmuring the override sequences she had learned from her mother's teachings. Sequences meant to bind life to law, to bind strength to compassion, to turn a weapon into a protector. Ward could see every flicker of pain on her face, every tremor of fear that threatened to break her, and he pressed closer, lending her his steady breath, lending her his unshakable presence, and in that moment, the bond between them became a shield, a tether between worlds, a bridge of trust that neither Koru's threats nor the machine's fury could sever. The raider cruiser's shadow had disappeared into the storm above, its weapons spent but its threat lingering, a reminder that danger was never far behind. And Miri shouted that the final uplink signal had been neutralized, the cascading chains of energy collapsing into harmless sparks, meaning the machine's full fury could now only be calmed by Sayalara's hand, and by the force of her will alone. Sayalara's lips moved rapidly in the ancient Nalori commands, her voice rising above the hum, shaping the pulses of light, bending the energy, slowing the violent rhythm of the machine until it became a steady heartbeat again, and Ward held his breath, watching as the storm of violet fury inside the chamber began to respond, inch by inch, to her courage, to her decision to fight not for power but for life. Then the machine shuddered violently one last time, its core dimming, its veins retracting like a creature returning to slumber, and Sayalara collapsed into Ward's arms, trembling, exhausted yet alive, her chest rising and falling with ragged breaths, and he whispered her name, relief and awe flooding him as he held her close, feeling the weight of everything they had survived. Theron and Miri rushed to her side, checking the surroundings for any lingering threat, their own faces showing relief and exhaustion, and for the first time the chamber felt still, calm, as if the ancient machine itself acknowledged that its challenge had been met, and that the courage of a human soldier and an alien princess had restored balance in its pulse. Outside the canyon, dawn began to break, scattering pale gold and violet across the cliffs, and Ward guided Saylara toward the ridge, their steps slow but steady, each movement a small victory over the fear and chaos that had ruled them for hours. And as they emerged, the wind carried away the last echoes of Vaith Koru's threats, leaving only silence and the distant promise of safety. Communications from the station confirmed that the patrols were returning, and that the damaged drones and systems were being recovered. And as Ward watched the sky, he realized that their battle had not only saved the canyon, but had rewritten the fragile trust between humans and Nalori. Trust that would grow now because someone had chosen courage over fear, action over surrender, life over destruction. Saylara, leaning on him for support, finally lifted her head, her eyes meeting his with a quiet strength, and she whispered that she had been afraid to lead, afraid to make the choice, afraid of what her empire would think. And Ward told her that real leaders were made in moments like this, when fear meets determination, when destiny is held in trembling hands, when law and courage align together. They walked down from the canyon, their shadows long in the rising sun, the desert now calm, the storm dissipated, the pulse of the ancient machine a soft echo in the distance, and Saylara turned to Ward with a small, exhausted smile, saying that she understood at last, that discipline was not punishment, that courage was not absence of fear, that destiny was shaped by choice, not by threats. Ward nodded, the wind lifting his hair, his chest still heavy with adrenaline and relief, and he whispered that they had done more than survive. They had rewritten the rules. They had proven that humans and Nalori could stand together, that law and mercy, strength and compassion could coexist, and she squeezed his hand, a silent promise that she would carry this lesson forward. And as they reached the edge of the ridge, the first light of day spilling across both their faces, Varys 9 stretched before them, a world saved from destruction, a future still uncertain but brighter. And Ward realized that what they had fought for was more than survival, more than victory, more than peace. It was the trust between two souls, two species, two destinies intertwined in a single act of courage. The canyon behind them lay quiet, the ancient machine dormant, the wind soft and steady, and Saylara looked at Ward with eyes that reflected the sunrise, whispering that she would honor the law, the lives saved, and the human who had taught her the meaning of courage, while Ward, looking back at the sleeping canyon and the glowing horizon, knew that together they had not only defeated a warlord, but had built a bridge between worlds, a bridge strong enough to carry hope into the future.